Good morning and welcome to the first BOCC meeting of the new year. This is January 3rd, 2018. I am Kate Flavin, Public Information Officer with Sedgwick County. This evening, members of the public are invited to attend the 2018 Legislative Public Forum. It will be held here in the courthouse. Doors open at 6 p.m. The front doors open at 6 p.m. and it will be held in the jury room, and the event will begin at 6:30. This is a chance for members of the public to speak directly to our legislative delegation in Topeka. On Friday, Wichita, Sedgwick County, and WSU will have a formal ribbon cutting and open house for the new Law Enforcement Training Center on the Innovation Campus. This event will begin at 10 a.m. And one more reminder, if you still have your real Christmas tree, it's not too late to recycle that at various locations around Sedgwick County. And we have all of this information posted on our website and on social media if you follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And that Christmas tree recycling program is available until January 23rd. And we'd like to remind everyone to remove all the lights and ornaments from the tree before it's turned into mulch, and pick up the mulch while you're out there. Chairman, I will let you start the meeting.
Okay, Kate, thank you for that introduction. And to be clear, you said that at 6 o'clock this evening, the front doors to the courthouse will be open.
Yes.
For citizens to enter for that meeting. Okay,
that's right.
Very good. Well, thank you. Want to welcome everyone who's present in our room today and all those who are watching by way of television. And at this time, I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, January 3rd, 2018. Madam Clerk, first item.
Invocation to be led by Pastor Sherdell Breathitt, Sr., Rock Christian Fellowship. Please remain standing for the flag salute.
Good morning, Commissioners. Let us pray. Gracious God, as we pause on this cold winter Wednesday, we've heard it referred to, you are the Alpha and you are the Omega. You're the beginning and the end. We thank you for this commission as we launch out on a whole new year. And we ask God for your grace and your presence in every decision that is made, that God is thought out and considerate of all of your people. We ask God that you just continue to have your way. For we just love you, we praise you, and we give you thanks in the name that is above every name, in the name that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God. And all who believe said, Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sherdell, thank you for your prayer this morning. Madam Clerk, next item.
Roll call. Commissioner Dennis?
Present.
Commissioner Ransaw?
Present.
Commissioner Howell?
Present.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Present.
Chairman Unruh.
Present. And next item.
Public agenda.
I don't have anything for public agenda. No one has signed up this morning, Commissioners, so we will go to the next item.
Appointments. Item A, resolution reappointing Clifford KOEHN to the Sedgwick County Advisory Council on Aging.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Yost, County Councilor. Actually, items A and B can be taken together because they pertain to the same board. Resolution under item A is one reappointing Mr. Clifford KOEHN to the Sedgwick County Advisory Council on Aging. Mr. KOEHN has been serving on this council, but his term has expired. Commissioner David Dennis is recommending that he be reappointed for a new term that would end on January 2 of 2022. I understand he is present to be sworn. Then item B is a resolution accepting the resignation of Ms. Jamie Brown as a member of that board, and we don't have a replacement yet at that time. And I would urge adoption of both of these resolutions and that Mr. KOEHN be sworn in.
Okay, Commissioners, what's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to recommend adoption of the resolution reappointing Mr. KOEHN to the Sedgwick County Advisory Council on Aging, and also to approve the resignation of Jamie Brown.
Second.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ransaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And Cliff is here this morning, and Kelly Arnold, the County Clerk, will swear him in.
Good morning, Commissioners. You ready? Please raise your right hand. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Kansas, and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Sedgwick County Advisory Council on Aging, so help me God.
I do.
There you go. Congratulations.
And Cliff, did you want to make any comments?
I don't believe so at this time.
All right.
We're just working at trying to get higher on the pecking order.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your service. Next item, please.
Item C, resolution reappointing Brian Powers to the Wichita-Sedgwick County Access Advisory Board.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Yost, County Councilor again. This is a resolution reappointing Mr. Brian Powers to the Access Advisory Board. He's been serving on that board, but his term has expired. Commissioner Dennis is recommending that he be reappointed for a new term that would end on May 31, 2019. I'm told he's not going to be present, but maybe he is. You might want to inquire, but I would urge adoption of the resolution.
All right, Commissioners, what's the will of the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, it's my pleasure to reappoint Brian Powers to the Wichita-Sedgwick County Access Advisory Board.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And I don't see Brian present, so we will swear him at the appropriate time. Next item, please.
Item D, resolution appointing David Wright to the District 3 Citizens Advisory Board as recommended by Commissioner Dennis.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Yost, County Councilor, Mr. David Wright is being recommended by Commissioner Dennis to serve on the District 3 Advisory Board. I don't know that he's present, but it is an appointment for this board, and I would urge adoption of this resolution.
All right, Commissioners, once again, what's the will of the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, it's my honor to appoint to my Citizens Advisory Board Mr. David Wright. He will be taking an empty position that I've got on the board.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And next item.
Item E, accept the resignation of Vernon Yoho from the Sedgwick County Animal Care Advisory Board.
Mr. Chairman, this is a resolution accepting the resignation of Mr. Yoho from the Animal Care Advisory Board. We have no replacement for him at this time, but we will, of course, run that resolution when we do have that. I would urge adoption of this resolution, which would accept the resignation.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Vern Yoho for his service and make a motion to accept his resignation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And next item.
New business. Item F, discuss purchase of county administration building.
Commissioners, Mike Scholes, County Manager. Welcome, everybody. In a few moments, you'll hear from Deputy County Manager Tom Stoltz and staff as he outlines the process undertaken to this point that we have worked to potentially find a new county administrative building. We have several people in the audience today who are going to be a part of this briefing that I wanted to recognize. First is I want to recognize Joe Johnson and Justin Graham, who we use as an architect from Schaefer, Johnson, Cox, and Fry over there. Steve Martins is also here, serves as our real estate broker, who has helped us through this process with NAI Martins. We'll also hear from District Attorney Mark Bennett, who has spoken to you several of times. He's not here yet, but he'd like a chance to speak, and he has talked to the Commissioner several times during this process, during the space management discussions. Also, the County Clerk, Kelly Arnold, would like a chance to speak on behalf of himself, the Treasurer and Register of Deeds, Linda Gazire and Tanya Buckingham. Also, Judge Fleetwood is here and available if needed to speak on behalf of the District Court. We also will use Will Deere, who has been we've used during this process as from the county counselor's office, and of course Eric. And then there are others who are part of the process of touring the buildings and doing an analysis that we'll talk about during the briefing. The needs and constraints of the judicial system that we have talked about have been a reoccurring theme over the last couple of budget cycles. I know for last year's budget cycle and this year's, as we've gone through the budget cycle, has been a reoccurring theme amongst all departments about needs. Many of you have toured many of the different departments and also some of the outlier departments and have seen a lot of this overcrowding. But the district courts and the district attorney's office, along with the sheriff's office, have made these needs clear in numerous meetings that began last year and ended through, and also we talked about during the budget retreat, but also talked through the adoption of the budget in August. At the June 13th BOCC staff meeting, Tanya Cole, if you remember, presented a great deal of information to you about space needs and a potential process to move forward. We'd gained consensus from the commission at that time to look at potential options for moving the county administrative services to another building in the downtown core area. That was your guidance to us. A great deal of staff time has gone into this process, which included a 2017 county courthouse space needs study that outlined the total additional square footage that would be needed. That was working with Justin, who helped us in that process. And working with Steve Martins, we outlined what guidelines that we should follow in the property search. From a review of 22 initial properties, in his search found 2 properties stood out as viable options. Both properties have been reviewed and are deemed suitable to serve as county administration building, with some renovations needed on both. Both of these properties were also toured by a group of internal stakeholders. The options regarding these 2 properties will in the end be provided to you, presented to you as options to purchase. This is obviously an important decision for the future of Sedgwick County, and our request today is that you would select an option that you would like us to move forward with. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom, who will start us in the briefing.
Okay, let me interrupt just a moment and call on Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, I see our city administrator from Clearwater, Mr. Ron Marsh, here in the audience today, and since this is going to take a while, is there any way that we could move item G in front of this, just so that Mr. Marsh can get back to Clearwater and not spend this whole morning with this, Mr. Chair, without objection?
I don't think there'll be objection to that. The Clearwater issue should take just a couple of minutes, and
Justin's there on the front row, so
we can do that right quick and then come back to
sorry, Tom.
The item under discussion. Commissioners, is there any objection? All right. Well, then forgive us for this interruption, but I think it's the right thing to do. So, Justin, please go ahead with item G.
Good morning, Commissioners. Justin Wagoner, Assistant County Counselor, here presenting on the proposed island annexation for the City of Clearwater. And as you know, an island annexation is when the proposed land to be annexed does not actually join the city's contiguous city limits. I'll refer you to the map that's on the screen here. The properties in red, the property that's proposed to be annexed. You'll see the bulk of Clearwater is right, in the central area, but then there's a couple subdivisions to the north of it that have had a series of island annexations that have occurred. This property is within the Prairie Meadow Estate subdivision. It's approximately 5 acres in size. This particular parcel. The Clearwater City Council approved a resolution to seek the island annexation of this property. In this particular case, the property owners consented to the annexation and requested to connect to the city's water services. The reason behind that is as new homes are built, they need water. It's not suitable land for well water. The Metropolitan Area Planning Department completed the staff review of this annexation and recommended that you make a finding that the annexation would not hinder the proper growth and development of the area nor any other city within Sedgwick County. That's included in your backup materials. Also, pursuant to the annexation, the city would provide police services, which are currently provided by the sheriff's office. The city does not plan to extend sewer services to the area. The city of Clearwater and Nennisquah Township have an interlocal agreement regarding road maintenance within this area. And since this property actually already falls within the Clearwater Fire District, it would not have any impact on the Sedgwick County Fire District Number 1 budget. No other city in Sedgwick County has indicated this parcel is part of its future urban growth area. Under KSA 12520C, there are 3 requirements under which an island annexation may occur. First, the land has to be located in the same county as the city. Here it clearly is. Second, the owners must petition or consent to the annexation. In this case, they've consented to it. And thirdly, the Board of County Commissioners, by a 2/3 vote, must find the annexation will not hinder or prevent the proper growth and development of the area or that of any other city within Sedgwick County. That is the recommended action to make that finding. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and as Commissioner O'Donnell noted, the city of Clearwater does have staff here present that could also answer questions.
All right, thank you. We've been through this previously on multiple occasions with Clearwater. I don't think there's any objection, but Commissioners, is there any comment or question? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marsh, is there anything you'd like to say?
No.
All right.
Pretty self-explanatory.
All right. Well, Mr. Chair, do we need to go out to public for this? Or?
Well, on zoning changes, we ask if there's any public comment. We don't have a motion before us at this time, but we will have just in a moment. But is there anyone who has an interest in this annexation that wants to speak? All right, I see no one that wants to speak, so I think Commissioner Dennis?
I just have a brief question from Clearwater. We seem to do individual island annexations. Is there any reason that you don't just annex all of that area, because it's going to happen eventually, isn't it?
Good morning, Commissioners. Ron Marsh, City Administrator for Clearwater. Commissioner Dennis, we leave that up to the property owners, a right for self-determination. If they don't want city water or city amenities, they don't have to have it, but if they want it, then they need to be annexed. So we leave it up to each individual property owner out there.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. I just wondered why we kept going through this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other comment or question? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would move that we approve the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And Mr. Attorney, is that appropriate?
I think that's sufficient, Chairman.
Okay. And does this take 4 commissioners?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Without further explanation, then, I'll ask the clerk to call a vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioners.
you, Justin. All right, well, thank you all for allowing us to interrupt the presentation to take care of this issue, which we thought would be pretty quickly taken care of. So we'll go back now to item number F, and Mr. Stoltz is ready to go.
Thank you, Chairman. Tom Stoltz, Deputy County Manager. Today, Commissioners, here to talk about, as the manager prefaced before the County Administration Building, we're going to have a few slides over just the review of the need of the administration building, a little bit on the process of analysis, and then we're going to, in some detail, talk about the 2 sites that the manager mentioned. He also mentioned that we have a history of searching for an administrative building. That's actually started in 2010. There was a space utilization study done back in that time. And already during that time, 7-8 years ago, there was a prediction of the courts, the district attorney's office, and the sheriff's office growing to a point where this building would no longer suffice for both a courthouse and an administrative building. It came into clear focus this year during the budget process for 2018 with the dates on the screen today. We've discussed this many times in public agenda, in public perception. Tanya Cole, who I'm here presenting for today because she had family medical emergency, has done the lion's share of the work on this and actually gave you a presentation in June regarding space management study. The space needs that are driving this come from the district court, the district attorney's office, and the sheriff. Mark Bennett from the DA's office is here to talk a little bit later in the presentation, as is Judge Fleetwood, about some particulars of why this is why they need more growth. The first thing we did after the space utilization meeting is had the architects that manager referenced from Schaefer, Johnson, Cox, and Fry come in and do a programming study of these three entities. District Attorney's Office ends up needing, through programming, an additional 30,000 square feet of space. I'm sorry, District Court does. District Attorney's Office needs 15,000 more square feet, and the sheriff operations inside the courthouse need an additional 2,000 square feet. Mark will talk about this, but I know that he has space needs due mostly to evolution of crime and also technology changes in how crimes are investigated, mainly through body cams being worn by police officers and sheriff's deputies. The next phase of the analysis was to do programming for all of what we would consider administrative resource for county government. And this slide's kind of busy, and let me kind of talk to you about the numbers. If we look at county clerk, the very first bullet, county clerk is currently in 4,010 square feet inside this building, and upon programming for their future needs over the next 10 or 20 years, 4,883 square feet were programmed in, and you can follow that all the way down. The left-hand number is what the current space is being used in this building, and the right-hand number is the projected space needed when we move to different space. I'll mention that 3 of these entities are not currently in the courthouse. Human Resources is over at Historic Courthouse currently, Print Shop Mail Room same way, and ITSS is split between Munger and also Historic Courthouse. So those, if you bring all of those entities in, we find that we need a tenant space in a new building of about 74,000 square feet and a gross area of a little north of 90,000 square feet. Now I want to talk about these two numbers because we're going to reference them as we go through the presentation. Tenant space is the exact space needed for offices and conference rooms and those types of things where we actually occupy space. When we talk about gross area, and Justin can talk to this also, we're talking about circulation space, bathrooms, stairs, and common space needed just to run an administration or an office building. So those are the difference between the two numbers, and that number is not exact science. Architects will tell you it's between 22 and 28% on top of the tenant space area. So for average here, we use 25% circulation space to arrive at this number. After the programming piece was done and we had some gauge of what we would need for an administration building, we then called upon Mr. Martins to come in and begin a search of potential buildings. And we focused on 3 areas, the 3-block downtown core area, what is we commonly talk about as government center in the building or in the city. Downtown Wichita, which of course is more of the core area, goes down as far as Kellogg, up as far as Murdoch, all the way over to Hydraulic, and then just all buildings within the county. That's how Steve ran his study, and he was looking for buildings between 20,000 and about 250,000 square feet. After his review, he came back with 5 potential sites. 150 North Main, Gander Mountain property, 2 that we're going to talk about today, Riverview and Murphin Plaza, and USD 259 admin building, their old admin building on 201 North Water. Gander Mountain, the structure of the building didn't really fit our needs, so that was struck from the list. 150 North Main was in such disrepair that remodel costs on that would have been prohibitive for us to venture into. The USD 259 admin building was actually taken off the market by the owner, who is refurbing that for condominiums and living space. So that left us with Riverview and Murphin Plaza. The Murphin complex, it actually is 3 buildings being proposed by the owner, and if you look at this screen, starting at the upper left going clockwise, the main building is the Murphin Plaza. The right-hand building is 221 North Main, which is right now just an empty shell of an old office building, and the bottom structure is 201 North Main, which is currently the Sunflower Bank. All 3 of these buildings are being proposed. This is actually encompasses almost a city block, with Water on the west and Main on the east, 2nd Street to the north, and 1st Street on the south. And I'll have an aerial diagram a little bit later that I'll show you, which will encapsulate that. The Riverview building is at 345. Riverview is kind of at the confluence of Veterans Parkway, Central, and Riverview streets, a single building with a attached parking lot. So after these 2 buildings were identified, we then took a group of stakeholders through tours of the building. I know some of the commissioners went through one or both of these sites. The stakeholders included anybody who is going to be moving into this building. So the clerk's office, the treasurer's office, deeds, records, HR, et cetera. Anybody who was going to have an office in this facility went on this tour. And it wasn't just necessarily a tour to look at the building. We actually gave them rating sheets and had them score a series of criteria, some of which are mentioned here. For adequate and convenient parking stalls, potential costs of renovation, roughness of the building, efficiency and property conditions, and a very important piece is ease of access for customers and citizens to come into, and floor adjacency. Floor adjacency is a subjective kind of analysis, but when you look at how our elected offices, the deeds, the treasurer, clerk all work together, it's important that they're in close proximity. Same with the commissioners, the manager's office, the legal office. There's times when we have to have certain floor adjacency, which would lead to greater efficiency. So that's what we were trying to rate when we went through these buildings. The Murphin complex, as I mentioned, is actually 3 different buildings, varying in age, 40, 50 years. One is 100 years old, actually, and you can see the appropriate square footage. The 221 building, when we toured it, actually is in such disrepair that would probably have to be demolished, and we would actually need more parking at that if this site was chosen at that location. So we'll talk about demolition costs here in a little bit. The main administrative building is the 250 North Water site, 76,000 square feet. It's 6 stories, has 181 parking stalls. And the parking in this area is a little bit unique, and when I put the GIS satellite photo from above, you'll be able to see the parking layout a little bit better. Both of these buildings that we're going to talk about, Murphin and Riverview, are currently occupied with tenants. 221 is an empty building, and the appropriate appraised values in there from the county appraiser. When we went through the Murphin complex, these are nice buildings, both of them. They have nice finishes. The 201 building, which is actually the bank, has a relatively new HVAC system. The cons on when you look at the bank and the Murphin building, we'll need some updates to finishes, as will Riverview. There are parking concerns, not necessarily because of location, but because of quantity. There's just hardly enough parking there in numbers. There are one-way streets which surround this building on 3 sides. On the 250 building, the main building, the air conditioner chiller is old. It is an all-electric building. And the 221 building, as I mentioned, if we were going to occupy that instead of demolish it, would require a total upgrade of HVAC system. It would be a campus setting. There are multiple buildings involved, at least 2. And here's just a view from the air. In the yellow area, that is the parking associated with Sunflower Bank. The blue area is the parking associated with the 221 building and the 250 North Water building. So you can see that this pretty much lays out an entire city block. The Riverview building was built in 1982. It has a little north of 86,000 square feet. It's a 7-story building. It has more parking than the Murphin Plaza does. There's 329 parking stalls there, and that's actually a 360-degree parking kind of arrangement where there's parking on all 4 sides of the building. There are leases there. The appraisal value you can see listed. And if the county, just like Murphin, if the county would purchase this building, there would be leases available of which we would receive money until such time as those tenants left for other sites or the leases were negated. The Riverview owners did give us a lease cost of about a little south of $500,000 per year that the county would realize if we took this building over. We did not get the number from Murphin, but there would also be lease there too. Pros and cons of Riverview. Murphin had 2 elevators, as does Riverview, although Riverview actually has a 3rd shaft built into the building to where if we wanted to install a 3rd elevator, it would be, from a construction perspective, much easier. The finishes were good in this building as they were in Murphin. The HVAC is in good shape. It is a single building. It would not be a campus. We could all be under one roof. 77% of the building could be vacated relatively soon, within a year or two, with tenants leaving. And this was the preferred building by the stakeholders I mentioned before, the elected officials and the staff officials that went through both buildings. The cons were we had some ADA compliance issues on some of the bathrooms that we'd have to reconcile as we would crack this open as a public building. And there is only one street access to this, and that's off of Riverview. We may have to look at a second street access either off of Veterans Parkway or off of Central. Over the last couple of weeks, as we've been talking to ownership from both buildings, we were asking for a price, lowest price possible from them. And I'll just go through these very briefly, and then I'm going to want Steve Martin to come up and just kind of talk about these numbers for a second. The Murphin complex is bid in at $7.9 million. When we talk about renovation considerations, and for those of you who were here and remember the Reagan project, we looked at minimal renovation of both of these buildings. All said and done, Reagan was about $30 a square foot for renovation floors 1 through 6, and we used a similar number, similar mathematics here. Some of the areas would need a little bit heavier renovation. Many of them in both buildings would require very little. So just an average of $30 a square foot, looking at the bank and the main Murphin complex, not including the 221 building, that number would be just a little bit south of $3 million. We would have to demolish 221 North Main. The estimate bids we get on that are between $135,000 and $175,000, and if we would pave over that space with asphalt, that's going to run around $40,000. The Riverview building option came in at $7.098 million. Renovation costs, using the exact same mathematics that we did for Murphin, would run about $2.6 million. And during this time, if the commission deems it so today, we would give it a due diligence period and can probe in and actually firm these numbers up as we get into the building and actually start doing analysis. Steve, I would like him to come up and talk just a little bit about the asking prices of these buildings.
Good morning, Commissioners. Steve Martins with NAI Martins. Just some brief comments on the 2 proposals that are in front of you. Neither of these buildings were actively on the market at the time we did the study. The owners were approached and expressed a willingness to submit their buildings for consideration by the County Commission. I think in our downtown market, we've seen in the last 18 months, or 24 months, a number of what at one point in time were vacant office buildings now taken off the market and put into service as residential properties. The former Litwin building is now called the Douglas, and a very attractive apartment and mixed-use building. The Bidding building has been converted to apartments. Both of those are at Douglas and Market Street. At Market and First Street, the building called Market Center was vacant. It's now in process to be renovated into apartments. Of course, the building to the north of that, I refer to as the former KG&E building, was purchased, and it has been successfully converted into apartments. So a lot of these buildings have seen a new life and a second wind, if you will, in terms of what's going on. I think that price and value in the process really depends on supply and demand. And this was a very extensive search. And in my opinion, the properties that we're talking about today, from a starting standpoint, the prices that have been proposed are within market guidelines for the intended use and the activity that's involved. I think one important thing to keep in mind, and Tom did reference this, but these buildings are occupied. There's tenants that are in the building. The owners of these buildings are looking at that income stream if they're selling to a third party. The county really wants to occupy the building. So there's to a degree maybe a little bit of a mismatch, but the benefit or the offset is that in the period of time to work through the negotiation process to get to a purchase contract for the county to possibly buy one of these buildings and then go through the planning and phase and all for the remodel, there will be rental income coming back to the county. And we're aware at least of the Riverview building in that instance, if we're on a 24-month time frame, and time frames have not been established in any of the buildings, but if we were on a 24-month time frame, that's approximately $900,000 back or $900,000 off whatever the ultimate purchase price would be. So I think the offers that we have or proposals we have are certainly legitimate and worthy of serious consideration.
Thank you, Steve. Commissioners, before Steve leaves the podium, is there any questions directly of him? Commissioner Dennis has a question.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate the information that you provided to us. I guess my one brief question, which probably won't have a brief answer, but we're looking at one set of buildings built in 1983, 1917, 1972, and another building, don't see the date right off, but anyway, they're not new buildings by any means. We're looking at $12 million to get into one of the buildings and $9.5 million to get into the other building. Is this the best option, or what would it cost us to build a building that's a 2018 or 2019 building?
I don't feel qualified to answer the question on the cost of a new building. Joe or Justin from Schaefer Cox might have a better and more informed answer on that. I would comment that the Murphin Plaza building and the Riverview building have been occupied since they were built by essentially the same tenants. The Murphin family was a co-developer of that building. Law Company and Law Kingdom were a co-developer of the Riverview building, and those buildings have been well maintained and updates and upgrades made to them as time has gone on. Certainly, because of the age, there is some depreciation, and to the structure and certain things, some change in those versus a brand new building. But I would have to believe that a new structure cost is going to be exponentially higher, and I'm not sure that the return or the functionality of a new one would cover that cost.
Okay. Well, my biggest concern was $12 million for something that's fairly old. I just want to make sure that that's the best decision. I don't know if Mr. Johnson has a better answer for me or not.
Okay, the question was the age of the buildings, and...
Well, I guess it's a trade-off. Do we buy something that's 25, 30, 40, even 100 years old for $12 million, or another building that's 25, 30 years old for $9.5 million, or do we look at building a building?
Well, I think both of the main buildings, the Murphin complex, the main building is around 30 years old, if I understand correctly, as well as Riverview. So there's some age there, but they're certainly not historic. If we were looking at building new, we might estimate if you had enough land and you were building a single-story building, perhaps in the $190 to $200 a square foot range for a new building. If you were looking at multi-story, that would probably increase some, maybe $200 to $220 a square foot. So there's certainly more cost in building new than a remodel, I would believe.
And what's the lifetime cost? I mean, when you buy a building that's old, you're going to have maintenance and so forth. I guess I'm trying to find out what it's going to cost us lifetime, 50 years, over the next 50 years. What's going to cost to buy an old building versus a brand new building?
Certainly have to give that some more detailed thought and consider the age of the systems and do some more analysis on that. I don't know that I can answer that right here.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howell has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to confirm some of the numbers here. I've heard the number 12 million a couple of times. I'm just curious. I'm not sure how that, adding these up, I'm getting around 10.8 for the option 1, around 9.6 for option 2. And is there some other cost I'm not seeing here? Anybody?
Commissioner Howell, the numbers that you see on the screen are our best estimates at this time in the analysis, and I think you're correct.
Okay. And we were kind of going fast, and we didn't have a copy of the presentation at the time, so I was just curious, what's the total square footage of the option 1 versus option 2?
Option 1, if you consider the two buildings, was around the bid 95,000 square feet, Main Murphin plus Sunflower Bank, not 221, and 86,600 for Riverview.
Okay, so 95 for option 1. And again, when I was grateful. I actually got the chance to go and look at these buildings, and I guess at the time that I was looking at the option 1, there was some discussion about actually using the building at 221 North Main. So is that decided that the building's not?
No, nothing's been decided. It's a rough building. If we were going to occupy that, two things. The remodel expense on that will be a lot more than $30 a square foot. That is a rough old building that would require extensive renovation. And number 2, it would further diminish the available parking in that campus setting for our needs, which we've gauged to be 240 to 300 parking spaces. We would not have that many parking places. Okay. So 2 issues with that.
So is there around 300 parking spaces, the second option? How many parking spaces?
Riverview has more parking, yes. And enough parking for our needs. Parking. Yes.
And then on number 1, again, I'm reflecting on a conversation that I had. There was some discussion about parking garage across the street when we needed it, and I don't know if that's...
I'll get to that in just a second when we cover CIP numbers. We did have a parking garage built into the original CIP, but I think in either of these options we would not need that, a parking garage.
And in terms of a timeline, are these similar timelines in terms of availability, or is there a significant difference in how soon we would be able to access these?
The Riverview building is a little bit more dynamic. There are more tenants there. They have leases which run all the way through 2022, although the bulk of the leases actually could be vacated within a couple of years. There are 3 main tenants in that building. Murphin Plaza, the main occupants are Cargill and Murphin. Cargill's building a new headquarters downtown, so their leaving is imminent. And Murphin would also be the other tenant to leave. So they both have leases attached, and I don't know that any one is more favorable than the other as far as occupancy timing.
In terms of location, reflecting on one of the questions I just heard a minute ago, I'm not aware of any land available in downtown and 3-block core that would be available for building. That would be one of the challenges, I think, of building in that area.
And let me go back just because my old MABCD days of new construction costs. I think Justin's pretty spot on with a $200 a square foot estimate on a new commercial build. Now, you have to buy land before you can do the build, so that would be on top of that. Commissioner Dennis, I think it's quite doable to do a 50-year analysis on build new, which would be heavy upfront cost, but maybe lesser costs on maintenance over time, versus buy old and have higher maintenance costs from get-go, but a lot less upfront money. So we'll get you an analysis put together, and we should do that in fairly short order. I think just based on history, I think that a purchase of an existing building is going to be a more cost-efficient way to go, but we'll get you the analysis so you can see the numbers.
But in terms of, if one of the requirements is to stay in the 3-block core, there's really not any land that I'm aware of that's
I think Steve did analysis, and there was no dirt available or for sale at that time.
So it brings me to my next question, that is, in terms of trying to find solutions to this, I understand one of the requirements was to stay close to downtown here, like within 3 blocks is one of the requirements, but that's a requirement that's based on the type of financing that's going to be used for this building. Is that correct?
Requirement might be a little bit of a strong term. There is a preference to do that for a couple of reasons. Financing, and then I think legal can talk about ramifications. If we would choose to have a administrative building outside of that 3-block area, there are some legal ramifications which are workable. So I don't know that it's so much of a requirement as it was just a very strong preference.
So I'm wondering about the, when we solicited these options for us to consider today, did anybody outside the 3-block area, or any options outside the 3-block area, did they pop up and maybe were eliminated in the process? Or we only looked at buildings?
No, there were, and I'll let Steve address that in just a second, but there were several buildings that we looked at across the city and across the county. And maybe if I could finish the presentation, Steve maybe could get up and address that process piece
I'll hold
of
my
it.
questions for later, but that's kind of where I'd like to understand that process a little bit
Very
better,
good,
how
sir.
we ended up with these two
We'll
options.
get that answered for you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I see no other questions, so go ahead, Tom.
Okay, very good. The last slide I want to talk about is just kind of our budget for this project. We set in 2019 CIP budget a total of $16 million, which was for a building, and there was some factoring of a parking garage into that number. That would be considered phase 1 of this process. Phase 2, which would be the remodel of this building to fit the exact needs of district court and the district attorney. We have budgeted in the time frame of 2020 to 2022 for $7.5 million. And at this point, I would like to invite, I think Kelly Arnold first. I know Kelly toured both buildings and is as the elected an officer, he's a major stakeholder in this process. And then let Mark Bennett and Judge Fleetwood talk about, kind of just summarize their space needs very quickly for you, and then we'll conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Commissioners. Kelly Arnold, Sedgwick County Clerk. I'm up here representing myself, but also the Registered Deeds and the Treasurer's Office. All three of us were able to be a part of the working group that have toured these facilities. We have had several meetings putting in what our needs are, not only our needs currently, but what we see as potential future needs. This decision is going to be one of these decisions that is going to affect how we do business and how we operate and where we operate for the next 40, 50 years. So it's important to us that that we get it right the first time. And there's three kind of areas that we looked at as the elected officials is, what is going to be, best for our customers, the people to come work in people to come to our office. What is going to be the best for our employees, and what is going to be best for us as a working group. Tom had talked a little bit about that it's very important that we all work, that we're all together because we all work so closely together in our day-to-day business. We have, and you had received this, looks like about December 19th, I had submitted, the three of us had submitted a letter just highlighting, and I won't go through this whole thing again, but highlighting some of the things that we saw that were important to us, specifically having for customers, having adequate parking, having parking that is very close to the building, having a lot of the customers come into our office and the treasurer's office, do take the bus, and so having bus services is important or being part of that route. The other thing is, at different times of the years, our offices have different fluctuation with people coming in and having adequate place for customers to sit. Many of you know that we have done homesteads, and at times we would have 50 people sitting outside of my door waiting to meet with us to go through the paperwork on that. And so having a place that has adequate seating for our customers. For our employees, each of us have a few different needs. The treasurer's office needs to have a place where she can have tellers to be taking money, and having something very close to the first floor I know is important to her. For both the register of deeds, myself and the treasurer, is having an open office space. Our employees work together as a team all the time, and so making sure that we don't have individual offices, but we have I guess you could call a bullpen or an open area for our employees to work. And then another thing that's really important as electeds, but department heads and others, is making sure our services, where all of us are one working group. So register of deeds, the treasurer, the clerk, GIS, the appraiser's now downtown, so that's much closer for us. But also, for the BOCC to be close to us. We have our attorney to be close to us. I know probably 3 or 4 times a day we have the county councilor's office down in our office working on a project. Same thing with GIS coming to our offices. Having HR, having the county manager, but having us as a working group. And so after touring both sets of these buildings and looking at the space that is available, doing it where it is going to be cost efficient, we really only came up to one conclusion, and that was the Riverview building. That was one facility where we'd all be under one roof. We looked at the different floors and saw that was what we felt like would be best for our needs, for our customers, and for Sedgwick County as a whole. And so we strongly prefer to have that building if these are the 2 options that we are looking at. And it was an important enough decision. I wanted to make sure that I represented all of us here to you. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be around to take questions.
Well, Mr. Clerk, I don't see any questions right now, but thanks for your presentation. And Chief Administrative Judge, Judge Fleetwood.
Commissioners, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I always appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you. I feel like it allows me to be more involved in this whole process of county government, and I appreciate this. I do have an Apple Watch, though, that keeps track of me. It has a health, and it just went off and said, breathe. So, what is the driving expansion as far as the courts are the driving need for expansion? This has a lot to do with some of the things, the evolution of court and justice. One of the things that we are looking at strongly, and we are being encouraged by the Supreme Court and also by the National Center State Courts, is moving towards the idea of specialty courts. I don't know if we discussed that in great detail first when we talked about it, but it will require an expansion of other courtrooms for this process. Specialty courts involve things like our drug court that we have now, but veterans courts, which I think we all have a strong interest in, domestic violence courts, mental health courts, that all require a more nuanced approach to justice and dealing with some of these people. The courtrooms we have now are some of them are generally not designed well for that kind of expansion. Some of the courtrooms we have right now are their design uses space is not good. We'd like to expand those courtrooms, make them give them more space to work with. We also anticipate additional magistrates that will be coming in. We're asking again this year for magistrates. When I talk to the state legislators, they refer regularly to why do we not have magistrates. I didn't have a good answer for them previously. I wasn't sure that we needed them, but we do have a growing need. I think they're going to be an essential part of justice here in Sedgwick County. We don't have a place for them, and we need that growing space. the Court of Appeals. We actually have a statutory obligation to provide the Court of Appeals with space here in this courthouse. We haven't been able to do that for quite some long period of time. They've been gracious about it. They've found space other places, although they have contacted me just 2 weeks ago asking if I could make arrangements for courtroom space for the Court of Appeals to come and meet here in Sedgwick County. As you know, I've gone over a lot of these points with you before. The need hasn't changed. The court is expanding, and the court needs some greater use of space. And I can go some of the more details if you desire. But I do encourage you to look positively upon this centralizing of county administration, county government, separate from this courthouse. The only downside of this whole process that I can think of right now is what I anticipate being the Oklahoma land rush between Mr. Bennett and myself when space is available. Anyway, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Judge, I don't see anyone asking to speak, so thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. District Attorney Mark Bennett, good morning.
Thank you. Well, I was going to try to think of some quippy to say about the Oklahoma land rush, but I'll be respectful to the judge. So, you know, I was thinking about this building. This is my 20th year working in this office. When I started off, if you come in through the north building, you used to be able to walk down a hallway into what essentially dumped out at the jury room, and that was another county agency. But over the years, we've sort of just added to our space, and we are now at a maximum capacity in what's commonly referred to as the annex there, the north building that juts out from the courthouse. Everything on those two top floors you see above ground is my office now. And that's the product of several factors. One is just the crush of business. Just to give you an idea, to quickly start with, I'll try to be mindful of time here. The amount of work that gets done in our office is you know, think about it until you look back at the course of a year and look at our statistics compared to the balance of the state, and it is pretty staggering how much work gets pushed through our office. Last year in 2016, the Sentencing Commission detailed that we had over 3,400 felony cases that went to sentencing, that went to judgment, and they assessed that by virtue of the number of sentences that are handed down in the journal entries. And while that seems like, well, 3,400, that's a pretty good number, just by comparison, the next closest in the state was Johnson County, which I believe has, their actually population is just a little bit higher than ours at this point. They had 1,700 cases, so basically twice as much work is being done in terms of felonies here as the next nearest county. You look over at say Kingman County. I think Matt did 26 cases, felonies last year that got resolved. And even Butler County, and none of them are over 200-300. So number one, there's just a lot of work to be done here, and a lot of work requires a lot of people to do that work. You all know from each time I come up here, each budget cycle, how much effort we put into in our office trying to find efficiencies so that I'm not back here each year asking for more people. We've tried to have a very slow but measured requests for growth, only as needed. But the practice of law has changed in the 20 years that I've been in this office and the 20-plus years I've been a prosecutor in this state. It used to be that you could take a file and it would happen with some frequency. I'd get handed a file and say, try this case tomorrow. Okay, and I could take it home, and everything I needed was in a file that thick. Literally, we called Mr. Anderson over at the police department and make sure you had your photos printed off on glossy photo paper, and other than that, everything else should have been in the file. You had your photos, you had your police reports, maybe some transcripts, and off you went, and you tried your case. Today, that's an impossibility. The number of different types of media that we deal with, from surveillance cameras at not only commercial businesses now, but residents as well. Almost everybody has some type of surveillance. At least every block does, which is fantastic because it has enhanced the quality of law enforcement investigations and the quality of our work in court. We have so many situations now where we have actual video of the event or video of the cars and the people running from the event, and so that's fantastic. But there's no fast way to watch a video. You have to watch it in real time and make sure you have you know what was done. Body cameras, jail calls. I mean, I could go for the next 30 minutes just talking about all the different things that we now have to attend to, none of which can be given short shrift, none of which can be attended to in some fast and expedited mechanism. We have staff who are we have fewer staff doing more work than we ever have when it comes to support staff, the advent of computers and the ability to digitize our charging documents. We have centralized all charging, even juvenile offender charging, is all done under one roof now, and again in an effort to increase our efficiencies and make our product that more efficient and use fewer people to do so. But at some point there's only so much we can do. That leads us to where we are today, which is, and most of you have gone through our office, taken a walk through. We are literally at capacity. I have an attorney at the juvenile building who is ready to come back downtown, a young man who's eager to get started trying to see if he can be a criminal prosecutor, not just doing juvenile cases, but it's time to bring him down and put him in front of juries and see if he's capable of doing that. I don't have an office for him. I literally have no office to put him in. My guess is I'll bring him down and put him in a conference room for a while, and he'll get to sit and hope that somebody retires or decides to take a job in the private sector, I suppose. I've got a senior level attorney right now in one of my traffic attorney's offices because she didn't have an office at this point. We're out of space. On top of that, I brought Mr. Stoltz and Mr. Scholes down and Rusty, Mr. Leeds, to come down and look at our office space and also recognize it's very dated. We have, I think we're up to 4 different types of carpet on the floor, so you can kind of watch. You walk from what's kind of schizophrenic. You walk from one to another, and you have to watch your feet to make sure you're on the. I'm not being facetious. It goes from blue to brown to gray to. It's not exactly a professional-looking office, but luckily we're behind a closed door, locked door, so the public doesn't see it. It's time to upgrade, but I have been very reticent to spend money. The old expression, throwing good money after bad, comes to mind. I'm not going to go update my office until I know what you all want to do, and I just think that's trying to be a good steward of the public funds. We're going to spend money updating, painting, carpeting, etc. When I know this is sort of in the offing, that this is being discussed, so we're holding back on that. But this space has served us well. I talked to people. There's not too many, and I'm going over my time. I'll wrap this up, but. There's not too many people who remember when this courthouse was open and when the DA's office started off, but it used to be in a different part of the building. Vern Miller, Jack Foch, and a few other of the older attorneys here in town, regale me with the days of old when the DA's office was actually, I think, on the 2nd or 3rd floor here. But it moved over to the annex at some point, and that has served us well for a very long time, but we are simply out of space. It seems to me that the citizens are better served by having us in the building than out of the building. I can go on about that, but the bottom line is we need space. I think the best thing I can do for the next person who wants to be the district attorney is to make sure I've handed off to them a facility that is commensurate with the responsibility of this position, and puts my staff, the future staff of the district attorney, in a position to do their work within the courthouse. So that we can do the work we're hired to do and that the public expects of us. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Well, thank you, Mr. District Attorney. I don't see anyone with a question at this time.
Commissioner, before I bring Will up to kind of get to a decision point here, I wanted Steve to come back up and answer Commissioner Howell's question.
Thank you. Commissioner Howell, to your point, some of the properties in our initial presentation of the county in the downtown area included the Century Plaza building, the Finney State Office building. We've talked about 150 North Main, another building at 235 South Topeka, the USD 259 Training Center on South Main, Gander Mountain that we visited about. 3 of these were predominantly land plays. BG Products has excess land south of Kellogg on the river. Broadway and Lewis, there's a vacant site. St. Francis and 2nd Street, a vacant site. The Sutton Place office building and the former Red Cross building. As we move then out into the city and the county, the former Via Christi Ascension Senior Hospital at 2622 West Central, the vacant Corporate Hills building at Webb and Douglas, 101 South Webb, the former, what will be the former Ameritrust headquarters at 8710 East 32nd Street North that backs up to K96, a former supermarket at 1607 South Georgetown, an office building at 47th Street South in Oliver, a former call center at 7236 East Harry, the former Convergys call center, and a portion of Town West Mall. So those, beyond just the look in the immediate area, those were other properties that we identified and shared with county staff.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer, and I appreciate the detailed information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions at this time, Commissioners, I'm going to have Will come up and kind of talk about the concept of purchase option, and we're at a decision point.
Commissioners, Will Deere, Assistant County Counselor. I'm going to have Kate distribute. We've got an option 1 and option 2, which on the slides, option 1 was for the Murphin complex, which were the 3 buildings we've discussed, and then option 2 is for the Riverview building. Both of these options would allow the county a 90-day period where we could enter into a real estate purchase agreement with one of these sellers, and during that time period we would conduct additional due diligence on the property. That would include physical inspections and additional due diligence. So the decision really before you today would be to select one of these options, proceed with that seller through this 90-day period to enter into a real estate purchase agreement. Wouldn't bind the county to purchase the building. Would bind us to enter into negotiation in good faith with that seller. But we're not agreeing to buy the building today. We're just agreeing to sign the option. And so there'd be a 90-day period, and then obviously in the alternative we could select neither of the options. So I could stand for questions on what those documents say or how that process would work.
Okay, thank you. So the information before us, there's 2 options, and we are to, if things go according as planned, we would choose one, or can we say we want you to negotiate with both of them?
We really wouldn't be able to choose both, but both options contain a clause. It's actually clause 7 that states if we select an alternative option, it would terminate the option we selected. So there's not really a feasible way to pick both at this juncture.
All right, thank you. Well, there was some, I believe there's some just a casual conversation that I've had with commissioners that indicate that we see the need for a building. We want to make the right choice. We're just concerned about the pricing for buildings that are 30 years old. So we're trying to, I don't know if other commissioners want to speak, but we want to make sure that in an arm's length transaction we clearly get a price that we think is reasonable for the square footage that we're purchasing. And commissioners, are there any questions or comments that you have right now that you want to make of Mr. Deere? I think Commissioner Dennis was first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, these are fairly large packages that you just handed us to review, and I haven't read anything on any of these, and we hadn't seen the slides before today, so I guess my main concern, and the chairman's already mentioned it, is the total price for 30-some-year-old buildings that you've got. And I guess you just, to make sure that I understand your previous answer, if we choose one of these, we can't tell the other one to renegotiate and come back with a better price?
We wouldn't be able to select both options today, Commissioner Dennis. It would be defer to.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Yost, County Councilor, I do want to clarify. You could select neither and continue to talk with both of them. But if you select one or the other, it would probably pretty much terminate the potential option for the other. So you could do neither. And the effect of that is that you could be doing both by doing neither. So,
well, actually, I think that's probably my preference right now, is to say that I would select neither for a couple reasons. One is that I haven't read any of this information, and to say that I'm going to make a decision on option 1 or option 2 today without reading anything would be really difficult for me. The second is I do have a question out that Mr. Stoltz said that he was going to answer, and what's the cost of a 50-year decision point on possibly even building a building. And I'm not saying that would be my first choice by any means. I did quick math, and it's $18 million to build a building if the figures we were given was correct. So I guess right now my preference, honestly, going away from the presentation, and I appreciate all the time. You know, at the beginning of the slides, you showed how much time we've been involved in this already. And I hate to say that we're going to not make a decision today, but that's really where I'm at right now. The price is too high on both of those buildings, especially the $12 million, and I know that that's not an exact figure. That was what I rounded it off to when I was running it through my head. But a $12 million option on the first one is way high. I think even 9.5 is high. So right now where I'm at is that I think that we probably ought to go back and do a little bit more research before that we make a final decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will, I don't know if you can answer this question or if it's a Tom question, but we mentioned the fact that there are tenants inside of both of these facilities. I know that Tom said many of these people are going to be out, particularly of the Riverview building, but some of the leases, according to the slide, said they're going to be in there until 2022. What's the square footage that we can get in immediately, in the next year, in the year after that, and the year after that? Same goes with the Murphin building. We need to know what type of square footage we're talking about, and I don't believe this covered what leases were going to expire at what time.
I'll defer to Tom.
Yeah, I figured.
Commissioner, on Riverview first, there are leases there that run through 2022. The 3 main tenants of that building represent 77% of the total square footage of the 86,600 square feet. So about 60,000 could be available as soon as those 3 main tenants find space. We've estimated on how long that would take, a year to maybe 30 months for them to move out. And then the smaller tenants, if we would move in this direction to buy Riverview, could be looking at any time for additional lease elsewhere or moving. So it's hard to gauge that. But currently, by contract, they're in until 2022. But that can all be discussed and rearranged, depending on what the tenants choose to do. On Murphin, the 2 main tenants, Murphin, the Murphin Company, and Cargill. Cargill, of course, is imminent. I think their move-in time for their new facility is next summer sometime. And Murphin would have to, if we would pursue this building, would have to move his operations either to one of his existing structures or build something new. So again, we'd be looking at that 2-year time frame potentially. So it's similar on both of these buildings. Murphin's a little bit simpler math just because there's less tenants there. Riverview has a few more tenants, but the bulk of that building would be available in fairly short order, being 2 years.
I think those are some details we need to get before we can make an informed decision, just figuring out what's the time frame. a real time frame from the owners of Riverview and Murfin tell us you can absolutely have these buildings by this set date and nothing sooner or nothing later. We need something solid, in my opinion, before I'm willing to make a decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a question, and Will, you're at a point where you're talking about the legal things and making a decision on a contract, an offer, a negotiating point. But my question, I guess, is another one for Tom. One of your early slides indicated that the total administration building gross area that we thought we needed was 93.3, and it looks like the Riverview building is listed at 86.6. I mean, are we starting out with 6,000 square feet less than we think we need?
Two comments to that. The programming that was utilized to get to that 93 number, and Justin met with each division and department and went over each closet, each office, each conference room, everything that they needed. That number is based on future needs. That is not reality of what we have today. So we built in to that number potential growth into that 93,000 square foot number. The second thing, so yes, there's room for growth in that 93,000. The second number or point I want to bring up is when you talk about circulation space, that 25%, which drives this from 73,000 of tenant space to 93,000 of total of gross space needed. That number, if we're efficient, we can slide that number down to less than 25%, get closer to the 22% or 20% level, which would bring that building into exactly the size we need for not only current operations, but for future operations over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
I think there's a third point to that, too, is that when you do the renovations to either building, for instance, if we went into one of the buildings and gutted the first floor in order to put the BOCC or whatever that is, that's going to open up more circulation space. Or if we have to do renovations on the second or third floors to fit a function in that, it's also going to open up circulation space. So it could be adjusted too in our renovations, the square footage of either buildings, so the Riverview or the Murfin building.
Okay, well, thanks for that explanation. It's just clearly, as was mentioned, if we're going to make a move like this, it has to be with a 50-year move.
Sure.
And so I did not want to start out with insufficient square footage from the get-go. I mean,
we have I think Justin can correct me, I think the mathematics were what we are using today and what we are proposing in either of these buildings for the gross space is about 20% more than what we currently set in today. So there was growth factored into that number.
All right. Thanks for that answer. I want to yield to the preference of my colleagues up here. However, I'm convinced, especially by some of the testimony we've had today from our partners in the building, that we need to do something, and we need to do something sooner rather than later. I also am convinced from the presentation, taking all things into consideration, parking, size at the building and so forth, that the Riverview building would clearly be my preference. I am very sympathetic with the comments of some of my colleagues that we believe that that the cost per square foot of this is it's not palatable at this time. So I don't know what the correct way to go forward is. If we're all have that frame of mind, we need to have more information that convinces us. We need to just defer this decision. I'm not sure what the next step is, but I don't see anyone else asking to speak.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Counselor.
Mr. Chairman, in addressing Commissioner Dennis's concern about the costs and maybe not having enough information related to the costs, I don't have a preference between these two buildings, but I think you could vote for one option or the other and then negotiate with those folks about maybe getting the price down a little bit if you're otherwise content with that package. If you don't take either, then we're back basically to where we were before and trying to get their prices down. We've told them that this is the final offer. So you're free to choose neither if you wish and continue to negotiate with both. But if you have one that is a preference to you, you could select that. That doesn't bind you to anything. It's an option. And then we could continue to negotiate with those folks about various issues. And we'll have to negotiate a number of issues during this due
including a
diligence
time
period.
frame to make the building
Right.
available.
Right.
Yeah.
But so I'm trying to address your point. I hope I've done that. But
No, I think you have. I'm sure that my colleagues also appreciate that explanation. And I don't want to, go into every reason I think that this is my preference, but I think stated that enough in general terms. Part of my concern is as I said, is the price of it. We made a significant purchase just a few years ago that three folks in this room were extremely unsatisfied with, but it ended up, we made the purchase at $50 a square foot for a building. This here, as near as I can tell, is somewhere around $80 a square foot. I know that it's difficult to, it's really difficult to compare apples and oranges, and I know that I'm kind of making that, but and I don't know if Mr. Martins would want to make a comment on cost per square foot. Is that a relevant number to think about? Is this a typical price for office space in Wichita now? I mean, can you answer that question for me of my?
Mr. Chairman, a difficult question to answer, but I think in looking at the process, what is the need? What are the available alternatives that could fit that need and the cost? As I commented earlier, we've seen a significant move in the downtown market in terms of the number of available buildings out there. The options 24, 36 months ago were very different than what they are today. Supply and demand. And as the supply reduces, market forces are going to push costs to acquire a building. And I think what we're talking about today is to establish with an option a starting point, very similar in a private party transaction. A buyer makes an offer on a building. Typically there's a due diligence period where the buyer completes their due diligence to confirm the purchase price or renegotiate, if you will, clarify questions they have. I think in this instance, because of the public nature, the option allows the county to tie a building owner, to tie a property up, go through the necessary steps that are there to then, after that's done, conclude that yes, what the price that we're paying is we're getting the value we want for that price, and that price represents market.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Manager, did you want to make a comment?
I had one comment in reference to Commissioner O'Donnell's desire on the leases of particularly Riverview building. It's going to be pretty difficult to get a final determination from those lessees unless they knew that we were buying that building. To get a firm answer from them, from the multiple different lessees that are in that building, just based off this, speculation that we're going to buy it, I don't know if we're going to get the true answer what the date is that they would come out, because obviously most of them probably wouldn't want to come out. So until they actually either chose an option or purchased the building, it may be tough to get that answer. It would be more of an estimate.
And I understand that, but it's just really hard to say that you're going to buy a building and not know when you can occupy it. None of us would buy a house and say, I don't know when we're going to be able to move in.
Right.
So
I mean, you're right. We face that with both buildings. It makes it a little more difficult with Riverview because there are, a few more renters.
Yeah.
But we would be, to Steve's point, we would be getting lease payments to us during that time period, bringing the price of the total building down. So we would be getting some revenue from it.
Yeah. Yeah, it just, I'm concerned moving forward with the building, not knowing when we can occupy it, because the concerns of the district attorney, the concerns of the courts, the concerns of even our row offices. I think we need to have a calendar to let them know.
That's also part of what we would be doing in the 90 days of due diligence is we would really be getting down into the weeds with those tenants and trying to determine and establish dates that they would be willing to leave. All we have right now is contractually what their leases are signed through to a certain year, some to 2022, some less. That's really all we have today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dennis.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've toured both of the buildings. I do appreciate the clarification that Mr. Yost provided and the clarifications that the manager and assistant manager provided. My big concern still is the total cost of any one of these options. With that said, I understand our other electeds are very interested in the Riverview building. Between the two, after touring them, that would probably be my preference if I was to the point that I was going to say I was going to choose one over the other. If we're to the point where that we need to try and enter into some negotiations and it doesn't bind us to the fact that we're stuck at the end, if we can't come up with the solution, I would lean towards the Riverview building if that's what we need in order to be able to move forward. But at this point, I wouldn't say that that's the one I want to buy at the end of that. But if we need clarity so that our folks and staff can move forward and start working something, I'd be willing to look at the Riverview building as the option that we could move forward with. So I think we've still got a number of questions. Each one of the commissioners have already expressed a number of things that they're concerned about and that we need questions answered on. But if we need to move forward, again, I think we probably, if we're going to move forward on anything, we ought to move forward on the Riverview building and answer the other questions during the period of time that we are moving forward on finding out what the total cost would be and some of the other questions that were asked. And at the end, if we can't come to an agreement, then we're going to have to back up and come up with another option. But I guess if you have to have a direction that we're moving right now, my direction would be towards the Riverview building. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of curiosities. The total space needed by the district court, DA, and sheriff was stated to be about 47,000 square feet. And the total admin tenant area that we're talking about vacating out of this building, I guess, would be 73,678 square feet. And if you add in, I think that's what we said here. I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe I'm getting confused here with two different
That's correct, sir.
Buildings. Okay. So are we going to be moving 73,000? We're going to open up 73,000 square feet in this building available to the sheriff, DA, and district
no,
court?
sir. The difference in square footage is human resources, print shop, mail room, and ITSS, all of which are housed outside of the courthouse today, would go into the new administrative building. We would be turning over a little bit south of 50,000 square feet in this building for the DA, the sheriff, and the courts.
Do we anticipate that those three offices would use some of the newly vacated space in the historic courthouse? Would they use some of that space over across the street?
Are you referring to the district attorney and the courts?
Yes.
I don't know that they would need any space in historic courthouse if we could vacate enough space in this building for them to use. I don't know the answer to that question.
So again, I think Commissioner Dennis's comments, I think, are kind of where I'm at as well. But there's a couple things I'd like to understand a little bit more. And that is, what's going to be the cost to renovate the spaces needed for the sheriff, DA, and district court in this building, and then what are we going to do? What are we going to do with the space that's available across the street? What's going to happen to that space? Are we going to have a way to mitigate unused space that we currently own? To me, those are two questions I think we need to have a better understanding on. And then I guess what I'm saying is we're moving more admin than what is needed to satisfy the genesis of this entire discussion. So what we need to move is 47,000 square feet, but we're actually going to move 73,000 square feet of current activity. And so, yeah, if you just do the comparison of that, that's about 55% more moving than is really needed to satisfy the problem statement. So if we are going to move, I see there are some advantages, I think, to the Riverview building as it was presented to us this morning, but I have questions regarding the cost to renovate this building and what are we going to do with the other extra space that's not been addressed yet. So I guess I have some questions on that.
Can we answer some of those questions?
Absolutely. If you have answers now, that'd be great.
So the a lot of discussion has been made over the last year on different requirements that we need outside of the administrative requirement. We talked about storage. We talked about elections needing requirement. We've talked about a lot of things. A lot of those discussions were put on hold because we knew that the administrative building was kind of the big decision that needed to be made, that once that decision was made, we could then begin having some of those other discussions on what to do with storage, what to do with elections, what to do with the sheriff, what to do with some of these other functions that we needed to provide more capacity for. So we did put those on hold. So we would have the ability, if we moved, and for me, a 50-year solution is moving all administrative functions to an administrative building, which includes some functions that are over in the old courthouse, like HR. So if you're going to have an administrative building, it would be very helpful to have HR, finance, IT, some of those things all under one roof, which was the idea behind creating an administrative building. So I would see once we did that and we would relieve some capacity, there are functions over in the old courthouse that would fall in on the main part of the courthouse, but that would leave space open in the old courthouse for things like storage, for an increased capacity for elections to fold out into the building. But I would see those discussions, taking place after we made the decision for the new administrative building. So I looked at it as a 50-year solution and not more of a 10 to 20-year solution, to answer your question.
So a follow-up question would be moving out of this building. Would there be enough space opened up to satisfy the 47,000 square foot requirement of the sheriff, DA, and
absolutely
district court? Okay.
And then in our CIP planning, we also plan for that. So another thing to keep in mind, it's going to be a phased move. So for all the administrative function to move to either one of the building, it would be very tough to do anyway. We'd have to do a phased approach. So when we would move out of a floor, the DA could potentially move out of the annex into that floor, allowing us to start renovations on the old annex. So it would be kind of a phased approach on how we would use and how we have planned in the CIP budget to move into a new administrative building and to do renovations in the building, in the courthouse, as we moved out. So it made more sense fiscally to do it that way than making it a total. So in some regards, the renters being over there could have a benefit to us because we'd also be getting revenue while we were doing that phased approach and that phased move, if you will.
Okay, another question I've got. It was stated in the presentation that the appraised value of the number 2 option was $4.086 million, but the sale price to us is $7.098. My question is, that's a 73% increase over the appraised value. Does that seem? How do we know we're getting a good deal on this building?
I asked the same question to Steve yesterday, and he could explain it a lot better than I could.
Commissioner, on the county appraised value, that's based on the PVD model in a mass appraisal technique utilized by the state of Kansas. And while that is a legitimate and valid approach for mass appraisal technique, I think to compare that to a specific building and a specific circumstance a little bit gets to be apples and oranges. So I'm not doubting the $4 million valuation as it relates to mass appraisal and the county appraiser's office, but I think in terms of actual valuation, value for a specific seller and a specific buyer to satisfy a specific need, those are all circumstances that a mass appraisal is not going to take into account.
Okay. And then I was thinking of another question. Mr. Martins, are you representing both option 1 and option 2 today? Or are you?
I am hired. My firm has been hired by the county to work on your behalf.
Okay, so you're representing all options to us, whatever we're interested in.
I'm here today representing your interests in these options.
And just so I understand, this might be a question from Mr. Deere, but just want to make sure I understand. Once we have a full understanding of exactly everything that's been discussed today, do we have the option at some point saying, we just don't feel maybe it's just too much money or whatever. We want to just back up a little bit. Is there a way to back up after we approve option 2 today? Are we obligated to continue forward?
Yeah, we would just be obligated to enter into a negotiation for a real estate purchase agreement, which would involve due diligence and, potential renegotiation on the price, physical inspection of the building, all those types of things that would come into play. We're a long ways away from actually buying the building today. This is simply exercising the option.
I'm curious about, this might be a question for manager or maybe, not sure who it's for, but someone mentioned the renovation cost on the option 2 is almost $2.6 million. I'm curious, it was stated in the presentation that the finishes are nice, or finishes are good. So what's that $2.6 million going to do in that building in terms of renovation costs?
That number was derived using the $30 a square foot that it cost us to renovate Reagan, just times this number of square footage in Riverview, which is 86,600 square feet. So, but if we think about the Reagan project, and Riverview or Murphin would be very similar, there are some floors in those buildings which are pristine, where you would have, literally it'd be paint and carpet. And there are some, particularly in an area where we would have to form a commission meeting room, for example, which would require heavier types of renovation. So we averaged the number of $30 a square foot just based on the Reagan numbers, sir.
And so that $30 a square foot is the average cost after we did all 6 floors?
That's correct, at Reagan.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. According to what our counselor said earlier, if we didn't take one of these options today, that means we could still work with both buildings and maybe find better pricing from them. Is that correct, Mr. Yost?
You could do that. You'd basically be right back where you were at the beginning, where we've been talking with both these folks. If you select one option or the other now, you've got that person locked in to go no higher than what they are here, but they can come lower. But you probably you can't negotiate with both of them if you take one option.
Right.
But if the commission is leaning towards one and they wish to maybe get the price down a little bit, then they should probably take one option or the other.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think Commissioner Howell brought up some good questions about what we would be removing from the historic courthouse. I think we could have very strong arguments that we wouldn't need to move the print shop, for example, when that's firmly established there. And the DA's office, the courts, they use it a lot as well. I think we could argue that having IT across the street, when it would be closer to not just the courthouse, but also to our 911 center, there's arguments that we wouldn't need to move everything out. So that would take our square footage down from that 93,000 into a substantially smaller footprint, which would much more easily fit in the 250 North water facility. I think these are changes to the dynamic that we're all learning for the first time, that keeping both of these options open to try to fight a little bit harder for the taxpayer, having two options is much better for negotiating than having one option, in my opinion. So I would prefer keeping both open to finding a better price, but that's just my opinion, because I didn't even think about what all the individual offices that were going to be moved in until Commissioner Howell asked specifically about the historic courthouse, because I'm afraid that we are going to cannibalize ourselves and we're going to be left with a huge building that we'll have to find things to put in, and I don't think that's serving the taxpayers well either. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your comments. I probably have a slightly different perspective. My preference now is based on the fact that I believe that one building will serve us better than to have a campus setting. The parking situation is much more favorable on the Riverview building. The actual prices of the building are relatively close right now, but I think for us to make progress, I think we need to decide what is our preference and ask our negotiators and our people who are involved in this project to go forward and try to secure a better price. So I'm willing to make that indicate that preference now, and if it doesn't work out, then we just we don't go forward with it, and that may put us in a less favorable position if we go back to try to negotiate with other owners. But I think comes a time when we need to make a decision, and it needs to be a 50-year decision and one that we think will serve us best in the long term. So I'm ready to state my preference now for the Riverview building and ask you to go forward and make those negotiations, understanding we haven't bought a building. We've just said that's our preference, and we want you to talk to the owners and come up with a price we think is more favorable. So those are my comments, and I know my colleague Commissioner Ranzau hasn't opted in so far this morning. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it would be good if you're willing to make a comment, and if you decline, fine.
You might end up regretting that. Well, I have been sitting here thinking, trying to figure out what to say. First of all, I understand we have some space needs. I've never been 100% convinced that the only solution to our current space needs is a new building. I know we have some options here for doing some additions that I think might be something worth considering. That being said, I think I'm in the very small majority of that position. So we're here considering two different buildings. I mean, if you make the assumption that our space needs need to be addressed by a new building, either built or purchased, we are where we are here today. We have two buildings before us, and if that's my only option to choose between these two, well, for me, the clear option is the Riverview building. And there's a couple reasons why, one of which is the process that brought us where we are today. There's been a long process over many months that got us here, but it originally started, Mr. Martins was not involved. It was a commissioner-driven process that was focused on the Murphin building, trying to get us to purchase that building specifically. And then there was a proposal to do a land swap with the land up at the Greyhound Park. Once again, that was commissioner driven. And then we're back to buying the Murphy building. Now, somewhere along the way, after a few months, enough commissioners decided we need to get the manager, staff, and get Mr. Martins involved and have a better process and look at a bunch of buildings, and we did that. I'm very grateful for all of those, for that work. But for me, the things that happened before, I think, has somewhat tainted this process. Personally, I would disqualify the Murphy building because of the involvement of commissioners directly trying to push a specific building, which I believe was inappropriate. So beyond that, but even at that, I think Riverview is a better option. I mean, we're talking about the Murphy building is 3 buildings. One of them is 100 years old. There's limited parking. People will be separated. Just at its face value, and it costs more. Now the price of $80 per square foot and the $7 million for the building gives me pause. Okay, but that's kind of where I'm at, and I know Commissioner Dennis had some questions about what it would cost to build new. I have some other questions myself, but let me clarify on the. I've been reading this contract here off and on during the meeting.
Which one are you referring to, Commissioner?
Well, option 2, but I think they both have the same language, or do they not?
Commissioner, they do not have the same language, but we provided a form for both of them, and Riverview used our form, Murphy used their own form, but there aren't enough material differences between them for us to have made that, to complain about that, or to say that ought to be a consideration.
Well, the main factor is paragraph 7 on both of these talk about termination. Let me ask a question about.
Can I explain that, Commissioner?
Yes.
What this says, I think, and Mr. Deere can jump in, who had a lot more to say about this than I did. I think this says that if we select one or the other one's off the hook. Right. So we're not keeping them in limbo. Is that
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if we select one of them today, the other option would extinguish, and they would no longer be obligated to sell the building at that price or enter into negotiations with us.
Okay, well, what if we signed one of these today or approved one of these today, and then we did some further analysis and decided, well, maybe doing an addition here is better, or building a new building is better? Would those options still be available?
This simply gives us the option of buying this. It locks them in on no price higher than what's in this option. We can bring that price down with negotiations, or we can walk away totally. And the reason we're doing it this way is that we do have a fair amount of due diligence that still has to be done with any building, inspection and whatnot, and we do have to talk about the leases and things. So there's things you can't just do today, but you've got to take the next step forward. So this allows us, if we get unhappy with that process, and if you all change your mind and say, you know what, we'd rather spend the $18 million to build a new building the way we want it exactly than to spend this money on an existing building, you still have that option.
Well,
but there's a deadline for making that decision.
Right. I guess that was my question. If we pick one today, and to me there's a clear, if I have to pick between the two of them, there's a clear choice. But not being convinced that it's ultimately the right choice, if Commissioner Dennis, convinces me that doing a new building is better, then we wouldn't be in some legal jeopardy or obligation. We could opt out and then proceed, but we have our options open. So it's either that or accept neither and answer some more questions and move forward.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your comments, I think. I would say that I was involved in looking at some buildings and having conversations before we started a more formal process, and I would want to guarantee my colleague and anyone listening that there was no clandestine activities or thoughts or anything. if I'm thinking about doing something, if I have opportunity to go out and kick the tires, that's what I do, and I go talk to people, and so just want to make sure that that no one took a wrong implication from previous comments. So, but anyway, we're at the point now, and it just seems to me like in this process, pretty soon we have to take the facts we have, the best information we have, the best options we have, and make a decision at some point. And this is a decision point and not a final decision. And I think it's time to make the decision on this decision point. Right now we have a comment from Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our staff for a good job. This has been a long process since last June, at least, probably several months before that, I guess. Back in February, we started the discussion. So this has been a long time to get to this point. I want to say thank you to all those that got involved in bringing the proposal to us. I think it's important to show appreciation to those that worked very hard. And I want to do that this morning. So thank you for bringing this option to us for us to consider this morning. Back to Commissioner O'Donnell's comment, I wanted to say if we had any other option that we liked better, regardless of where that came from, even if Mr. Murphin wanted to propose something different to us, for example, we suddenly found interest in that proposal, we would have the option of moving in another direction for any reason. If we were to agree to option 2 today, and regardless of the reasoning why we wanted to go another direction, we would always have that option. In other words, it gives us total freedom based on your answer, Mr. Yost. We have total freedom to do whatever we want to do. It doesn't lock us into anything. It does lock in this proposal for us to do the due diligence to potentially go forward. And we might be able to negotiate the price differently or hone in on a better renovation costs or maybe a better space utilization plan to help us understand exactly what all would happen with this. And so I guess I could support a motion to go forward to option 2. And again, if Mr. Murphin wants to offer something different to us, again, based on Commissioner O'Donnell's comment, for example, if all we did was purchase the single building over there, 76,000 square feet, that more closely mirrors our need in terms of where we would be moving, potentially moving just 47,000 square foot of admin needs potentially, and it would fit that building much better. So I guess I do see there's other options out there that haven't really been considered yet. So I'd be interested in hearing from anybody who's interested in proposing other ideas to us to still consider that possible to get our attention on those other ideas. So if we just purchased a single building under option 1, for example, I would be interested to see what that would be worth. I don't even know if that's an option we would consider, but I think we ought to at least know what that cost would be and see how that would fit our needs if that was presented back to us again. So with everything I've just said, as it sits right now, I have no problem going forward with option 2, simply so we can understand better in 90 days or 150 days a decision point to really go forward with the contract. This moves us in that direction, so I can support that today. And in the meantime, if something else pops up, we have total freedom to go in any other direction we want to go. So I think that's a smart position this morning. So I'd be glad to support a motion for option 2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think we've heard from all 5 of our commissioners now, and pretty well we're leaning towards option 2 to move forward. So I guess it's time that we make a motion that we move forward with option 2 with the understanding that there are still some questions out there, and we do our due diligence and we answer those questions. We make the best decision for the citizens in Sedgwick County, but we do need to move forward. So I do make a motion that we move forward with option 2.
Thank you. I will second the motion. And Mr. Counselor, is that sufficient to move us forward? Right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Commissioner Ranzau.
I just want to say I'll be supportive of this motion for the reasons I expressed before, but this in no way assures that I'll vote yes at a future date if we need to do a contract. I reserve the right to review everything in its totality and make that decision then. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
No.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. Thank you, everyone that presented and helped us think our way through this to reach this point. Madam Clerk, next item.
Consent agenda.
Commissioners, Mike Scholes, County Manager, recommend you approve consent agenda items hotel through Quebec.
Move to approve hotel through Quebec.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And before I call the next item, I just want to acknowledge the presence of former Commissioner Peter John, who entered the room for the discussion, and so welcome to the commission meeting. Next item, please.
Legislative issues.
I don't think there are anything to discuss at this time, so next item.
Other.
Commissioners, are there any other items of discussion or information that you'd like to present at this time? I see none. So I don't think we have an executive session or a fire district meeting today, so we're at the end of our agenda, end of our discussion. Thank you all for being here today, and I'll declare the meeting adjourned.